Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Alex Turner, and I should have left the Brandon Walsh case buried with the autumn leaves 6 months ago. But when his sister Emma called me last Tuesday, crying into the phone about finding his journal with those impossible sketches of carousel horses and big top tents that shouldn't exist in Shenandoah National Park, I knew I had to go back to that cursed section of the Appalachian Trail where logic goes to die. I'm what the other rangers call a greenhorn. Barely 8 months into my first posting, still making rookie mistakes like forgetting to check my radio batteries or miscalculating sunset times. The veterans at headquarters whisper that I only got this job because my uncle pulled strings, and maybe they're right. But Brandon Walsh deserved better than being another unsolved missing person file gathering dust in Chief Morrison's cabinet. The morning I returned to Grid Square 4 Alpha, my iPhone showed full bars at the trailhead, GPS coordinates locked at 38.7273 degjan, 78.4385 degrad W. Standard procedure for a cold case follow-up. Check last known position, expand search radius, document any new evidence. Brandon had vanished on March 15th during what his family called a folklore research trip. Apparently he'd been obsessed with local legends about phantom entertainers and ghostly music echoing through the hollows. His last text to Emma read, "Found something incredible. Old circus route from 1923. They're not just stories." Then nothing. 3 months of intensive searching by K9 units, helicopter sweeps, and volunteer teams had turned up zero trace. Until Emma found that journal hidden in his apartment, filled with detailed drawings of carnival scenes that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. By noon, I was 2 miles deep on the Limberlost Trail, following Brandon's documented route according to his journal entries. The October air carried that crisp bite of approaching winter, and I could smell wood smoke drifting from distant campfires. My pack held standard 72-hour emergency supplies, 4 protein bars, 3 water bottles, emergency blanket, first aid kit, flare gun, and a flashlight with supposedly 12 hours of battery life. The first sign something was wrong came at 1:47 p.m. when my iPhone suddenly dropped to 1 bar, then no service entirely. The GPS started showing impossible coordinates, numbers that would place me somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I switched to my backup handheld GPS unit, but the screen flickered with strange symbols that looked disturbingly familiar from Brandon's sketches. "Unit 7 to base," I radioed, pressing the talk button on my shoulder-mounted device. Static answered me, punctuated by what sounded like carnival music played backwards. "Base, this is Turner requesting radio check." Nothing but that eerie melody that made my teeth ache. I should have turned back then. Standard protocol when communications fail is immediate return to last known good position. But Brandon's journal had mentioned hearing music just before his final entry, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was finally close to something real. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many minutes. My breath began forming visible puffs, and ice crystals started appearing on tree branches despite the afternoon sun. I checked my altimeter, still showing the correct elevation for this section of trail. But the barometric pressure reading was completely wrong, indicating an approaching storm system that the Weather Service hadn't predicted. At 3:22 p.m., I found Brandon's campsite, or rather, I found what remained of it. His orange tent stood perfectly intact, guy lines tight, rainfly properly secured. But it was completely empty, as if he'd simply vanished mid-task. A camp stove sat assembled with a can of beans opened beside it, the contents still warm to the touch after 6 months. His sleeping bag was laid out, corner turned down exactly as if he'd just stepped away for a bathroom break. But Brandon's boots were missing, and his journal, the one Emma had found in his apartment, lay open beside the sleeping bag to a page I'd never seen before. The sketch showed a massive striped circus tent with the words, "Stellini Brothers Traveling Spectacular," painted across its peak in elaborate script. Below the image, Brandon had written in increasingly erratic handwriting, "They come when the mist rises, the performers who died in the fire of 1923, still putting on shows for audiences that will never leave." Can hear the calliope now. So beautiful. They're calling me to join them. The show must go on. The show must always go on. The journal entry was dated March 15th, 7:43 p.m., exactly 37 minutes before his final text message. As I photographed the page with my dying phone camera, a low fog began rising from the forest floor despite the clear skies above. It moved wrong, too purposeful, flowing uphill against gravity and wind patterns. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The temperature plummeted another 10 degrees, and I could see my breath like smoke signals in the gray air. That's when I heard it. The distant sound of carnival music drifting through the mist. Not the cheerful melodies of a modern fair, but something older, discordant, played on instruments that wheezed and groaned like dying animals. A calliope mixed with what sounded like a steam organ, punctuated by the crack of a ringmaster's whip and applause from a crowd that sounded far too large for this empty forest. I clicked on my flashlight, but the LED beam seemed to get swallowed by the fog after just a few feet. My hand shook as I pulled out Brandon's compass from his gear. The needle spun wildly, never settling on magnetic north. The music was getting louder, closer, and I could swear I heard voices calling through the mist. Step right up. See the wonders of the Stellini brothers. Death-defying acts, impossible feats. Come one, come all. Standard ranger training kicked in despite my terror. When lost in fog with failing equipment, stay put. Make yourself visible. Conserve resources. I activated a chemical glow stick and attached it to my pack, then set up my emergency shelter against a large oak tree. But as I was securing the guy lines, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth around Brandon's campsite. Size 11 hiking boots, same brand shown in his gear inventory. The prints were maybe minutes old, still sharp-edged in the damp soil. Brandon was alive, or something wearing his boots was walking around this cursed forest. The music stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete that my own heartbeat sounded like thunder. I checked my watch. 4:15 p.m. Plenty of daylight left if not for this supernatural fog. My water was already down to 2.5 bottles after nervous sipping, and I'd eaten 1 protein bar without realizing it. Then I saw the lights. Red and white striped tent walls materialized through the mist like a mirage gaining substance. Gas-powered carnival lights flickered between the trees, impossible strings of colored bulbs hanging from branches that hadn't been decorated moments before. A wooden ticket booth appeared beside the trail, painted in peeling red and yellow stripes with a hand-lettered sign reading, "Admission, 1 soul." Through the fog, I could see the peaked roof of an enormous circus tent, far larger than should fit in this small clearing. Painted canvas pennants snapped in a wind I couldn't feel, and rope flags bearing symbols that hurt to look at directly. The whole structure pulsed with its own inner light, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. And there, standing beside the entrance flap in his hiking boots and disappeared gear, was Brandon Walsh. He looked exactly as he had in the missing person photos. 26 years old, brown hair, athletic build, except for his eyes. They reflected the carnival lights like an animal's, and when he smiled at me, his teeth were too sharp, too numerous. His ranger uniform was scorched along the edges as if he'd been standing too close to a fire. "Alex," he called out, voice carrying impossibly well through the mist. "You found me. I've been waiting so long for another ranger to come. The show is about to start, and they need someone with authority to verify the safety conditions. You know, official capacity." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but Brandon was my case, my responsibility. I'd promised Emma I'd bring her brother home. I approached carefully, hand resting on my bear spray canister. "Brandon, your family's been looking for you for 6 months," I called back. "We need to get out of here. Can you walk? Are you injured?" His laugh echoed strangely, multiplying in the fog until it sounded like a whole audience laughing along. "Injured? Alex, I've never felt better. I've got the best job in the world now. I help recruit new talent for the show. And boy, do we need a good ranger to help with crowd control." As he spoke, figures began emerging from the circus tent behind him. At first, they looked like normal carnival performers, acrobats in sequined costumes, clowns with painted faces, strong men in striped shirts. But as they got closer, the details became wrong. The acrobats moved with joints that bent backward, their sequins glinting like scales. The clowns' makeup ran constantly as if their faces were melting, and their balloon animals writhed in their hands like living things. The strongmen's muscles bulged with tumors and growths that pulsed with their own heartbeat, and all of them were looking at me with the same hungry expression, like predators sizing up prey. The thing is, Brandon continued, stepping closer, once you join the Stellini brothers, you never really leave. We travel together, perform together, live forever together. And Alex, we desperately need someone who knows these woods to help guide lost hikers to our shows. Someone with authority, someone people trust. I backed away, fumbling for my radio. Static filled the airwaves, but buried in the white noise, I could hear voices calling for help. Please, someone help us. I want to go home. The show never ends. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all pleading desperately before being drowned out by that horrible carnival music starting up again. My flashlight beam swept across the performers, and I saw the truth written in their burned and twisted flesh. These weren't supernatural entities, they were people. Hikers, campers, maybe other rangers who'd stumbled into this nightmare and never escaped. All of them wore the same expression of desperate hunger mixed with absolute terror, as if they were screaming inside but couldn't control their own actions. Brandon was still approaching, and I noticed that his boots left char marks in the damp earth with each step. Come on, Alex. Just step into the tent. Meet the ringmaster. He's very excited to discuss your employment opportunities. The benefits are literally out of this world. I turned and ran. Behind me, the carnival music swelled into a deafening crescendo, joined by the sound of hundreds of people giving chase. Not just footsteps, but the crack of whips, the creaking of old circus wagons, the roar of big cats that sounded far too large and far too close. I crashed through the underbrush, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as branches tore at my uniform and pack straps. My GPS unit was completely dead, compass spinning uselessly, but I tried to maintain a heading away from the circus tent. The fog seemed to thicken wherever I turned, and twice I found myself running in circles, coming back to the same distinctive dead tree with 3 lightning strike scars. After 20 minutes of panicked flight, I stopped to catch my breath and check my resources. 1.5 water bottles left, 3 protein bars, and my flashlight already dimming despite the LED claims of 12-hour life. My phone was completely dead, not even powering on. Worse, when I looked back, I could still see the glow of carnival lights through the trees, no matter which direction I'd run. The circus was following me. Or maybe I was still inside it. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Alex Turner's situation? Comment below. That's when I remembered my ranger training about psychological operations during search and rescue. Sometimes when people are lost or hypothermic, they experience hallucinations that seem completely real. The key is to focus on concrete, verifiable information. Time, direction, physical sensations. I checked my watch, 6:47 p.m. Sunset was still an hour away, but the fog made it feel like midnight. I pulled out my emergency blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders, the metallic material crackling in the unnatural silence. The shiny surface reflected my flashlight beam back at my face, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the middle of a circus ring. Impossibly, the fog had lifted to reveal that I was inside the striped tent, surrounded by bleachers filled with an audience of shadows. Not empty seats, actual shadows in the shape of people, all turned toward the center ring where I stood like a trapped animal. Above me, trapeze artists swung from ropes that disappeared into darkness, their bodies trailing smoke and sparks as they flew. The ringmaster stood on a platform directly in front of me, wearing a red coat that had been burned away in patches, revealing charred bone underneath. His top hat sat askew on a skull that was only partially covered with melted flesh, and when he spoke, his voice echoed from every direction at once. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and ghouls," he announced to the shadow audience, who applauded with the sound of wind through dead leaves. "Tonight, for your entertainment, we present a death-defying act of survival. Watch as our newest performer attempts to escape the Stellini brothers' traveling spectacular." Spotlights blazed down from impossible heights, pinning me in their glare. I could feel the heat of the bulbs on my skin, real and burning. This wasn't a hallucination. I was actually here, in this place that shouldn't exist, surrounded by the ghosts of a circus that had burned nearly a century ago. The ringmaster cracked his whip and sections of the tent floor began dropping away like trapdoors, revealing pits filled with writhing shadows and the gleam of broken bones. "The rules are simple," he called out. "Navigate our funhouse without joining our permanent cast. Make it to the exit before the final curtain and you're free to go. But if you fall, if you fail, if you give up," he gestured to the bleachers, where I could now see Brandon sitting in the front row still wearing his hiking gear, applauding along with the shadow audience. "You become part of the show forever." A path lit up across the circus ring, leading through a maze of obstacles that materialized as I watched. Fire breathers lined the route, their flames real enough to singe my eyebrows as I passed. Tightrope walkers above dropped nooses that tried to catch around my neck. Clowns threw pies that exploded into swarms of wasps, and trained animals, or things that had once been animals, snapped at my heels with rows of needle-sharp teeth. I had maybe 30 minutes of flashlight battery left, 1 bottle of water, and 3 protein bars to fuel whatever this supernatural gauntlet was going to demand of me. My legs already felt weak from the earlier chase, and I could feel dehydration starting to affect my judgment. But Brandon was counting on me, Emma was counting on me. And somewhere in this nightmare there had to be an exit that led back to the real world. The first obstacle was a hall of mirrors that reflected not my image, but my fears. In one, I saw myself failing the Ranger Academy. In another, I watched my uncle's disappointed face when he learned I'd gotten someone killed on my watch. A third showed Emma Walsh sobbing as she identified my body instead of her brother's. I forced myself to look away and focus on the physical aspects, finding the real exit among the false reflections. My ranger training kicked in. When navigating unknown terrain in low visibility, use the rope technique. I pulled out my emergency paracord and tied one end to the entrance of the mirror maze, then followed the left wall while feeding out line. It took 12 precious minutes, but I found the real exit, the only opening that didn't show my reflection as I approached it. The next section was worse, a rope bridge suspended over a pit that glowed with the same hellish light as Brandon's eyes. The ropes were singed and fraying, and halfway across, they started burning under my hands. I had to move fast, hand over hand, ignoring the pain of the hot rope and the screams of the shadow audience below urging me to fall, to give up, to join them in eternal performance. My water bottle slipped from my pack and fell into the glowing pit. I was down to 2 protein bars and whatever saliva was left in my increasingly dry mouth. By the time I reached the funhouse section, my flashlight was down to maybe 15 minutes of battery life. The mirrors here didn't just show fears, they showed the past. In one, I saw the original Stellini Brothers circus in 1923, a normal traveling show with real performers and happy audiences. In another, I watched the fire start in the big top, spreading faster than anyone could escape. I saw performers and audience members alike trapped in the burning tent, their screams mixing with the collapse of the canvas roof. And in the final mirror, I saw the truth. The circus hadn't burned by accident. Someone had set the fire deliberately, trapping everyone inside. The shadow audience, the ghostly performers, they were all victims, bound to this place by their violent, unjust deaths, forced to perform for eternity unless someone could break the cycle. The exit from the funhouse was a slide that dropped me into complete darkness. My flashlight finally died, leaving me in a void so absolute that I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. I could hear the circus continuing around me. Music, applause, the crack of whips, but I couldn't see anything. That's when I remembered the emergency flare gun in my pack. The flare burst overhead like a red sun, illuminating the true layout of the tent. I wasn't in a circus at all. I was in the burned ruins of one, surrounded by the charred remains of bleachers and rigging from nearly a century ago. The shadow audience was revealed as the blackened skeletons of the fire victims, still sitting in their seats, still watching with empty sockets for a show that would never end. And there, huddled in what had once been the center ring, were dozens of missing persons, Hikers, campers, other rangers, all the people who had vanished in this area over the decades. They were alive but catatonic, staring at something only they could see, occasionally applauding or gasping as if watching invisible performers. Brandon was among them, but when the flare light hit his face, I saw a moment of clarity in his eyes. He mouthed one word: "Run." The flare was already fading, and I could hear the circus illusion beginning to reassert itself around the ruins. The ghostly performers were returning, the bleachers filling again with shadow audience members. I had maybe seconds before I was trapped in their eternal show. I grabbed Brandon under the arms and started dragging him toward what I hoped was the exit. He was dead weight, completely unresponsive, but I could feel his heart beating and his chest rising and falling. Whatever held these people here hadn't killed them. It was feeding on them somehow, using their life force to maintain the illusion. My second emergency flare lit up the night outside the tent ruins, and I could see the real forest beyond the supernatural fog. The exit was there, maybe 50 feet away, marked by a trail blaze I recognized from the official park maps. But the ringmaster's voice boomed behind me. "You cannot leave. You belong to the show now. All of you belong to the show." The temperature dropped so fast that my breath crystallized in the air and ice began forming on my uniform. Brandon's dead weight was getting heavier, or I was getting weaker from exhaustion and dehydration. My muscles cramped from the cold and exertion. 20 feet from the exit, 10 feet, 5. My hand touched real bark, real moss, real life. The supernatural cold released its grip and Brandon gasped like a drowning man taking his first breath. Behind us, the circus tent collapsed into the ancient ruins it had always been. The ghostly performers fading into memory. The shadow audience finally free to move on to whatever came next. We stumbled together down the real trail, using my last protein bar to get some sugar into Brandon's system and sharing melted snow for water. By the time we reached the trailhead at 11:23 p.m., my backup radio finally crackled back to life. Unit 7 to base. Emergency extraction needed at Limberlost Trailhead. I have Brandon Walsh alive and responsive. Chief Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Turner, what the hell happened up there? You've been radio silent for 12 hours. 12 hours. According to my watch, I'd only been gone for about 6. But Brandon's family would later confirm that he had no memory of the past 6 months. To him, it felt like he'd just stepped away from his campsite for a few minutes to investigate some strange music. The official report listed it as a case of missing person, found due to hypothermia-induced disorientation, recovered by Ranger Alex Turner following standard search protocols. I never mentioned the circus, never filed the photographs from my dead phone, which mysteriously showed only static when I tried to review them later. But sometimes on foggy autumn nights, I still hear carnival music drifting through the trees, and I know that somewhere in Shenandoah National Park, the Stellini brothers are still looking for new performers. I keep my emergency flares handy now, just in case. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Brandon Walsh. I read every single one. My name is Cole Anderson, and finding Megan Campbell's hiking boot, wedged 15 feet up in an old-growth Douglas fir with no climbing marks anywhere on the bark, was when I knew this wasn't going to be a normal search and rescue. I'd been a ranger at Olympic National Park for exactly 4 months and 12 days. Still new enough that my supervisor, Ranger Martinez, double-checked my radio protocols and made sure I carried extra batteries like I was some kind of Boy Scout. The morning Megan's family called in frantic. Their 23-year-old daughter hadn't returned from what should have been a simple day hike on the Hoh River Trail. I volunteered immediately. "Anderson, you sure you want to take lead on this?" Martinez asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Search and rescue isn't something you learn from a manual." "I've got this, sir," I said, checking my GPS unit and shouldering my emergency pack. My heart hammered with nervous energy. This was my chance to prove I belonged here, that I wasn't just another college kid playing forest ranger. I know these trails better than anyone. That was my first mistake, thinking I knew anything about these ancient woods. The Hoh rainforest stretched around me in cathedral silence as I hiked toward Megan's last known position. Coordinates 47.8606 degree N, 123.9348 degree W, according to the GPS ping from her iPhone before it went dead. The morning mist clung to moss-draped branches like ghostly fingers, and every footstep on the soft forest floor sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. I found her boot at 11:43 a.m., wedged tight between two branches of a massive fir tree that had to be 300 years old. The worn Merrill hiking boot hung there like some kind of grotesque Christmas ornament, 15 feet off the ground with absolutely no way she could have gotten it there naturally. Unit 23 to dispatch, I radioed, staring up at the impossible sight. I've got some unusual evidence at grid reference Hotel 7 Alpha. Copy that, Unit 23. What kind of evidence? I hesitated, knowing how crazy this would sound. Victim's hiking boot located in tree branches approximately 15 feet elevation. No visible climbing apparatus or disturbance to bark structure. Static crackled for a long moment. Unit 23, can you repeat that? The boot is in the tree. Dispatch? No way it got there naturally. My hands shook slightly as I photographed the scene with my digital camera, the metallic taste of adrenaline sharp on my tongue. The forest around me felt different now, watchful. Even the usual background chatter of birds and small animals had gone dead silent, like nature itself was holding its breath. I spent 20 minutes searching the base of the tree for any sign of how the boot might have gotten up there. No rope marks on the bark, no broken branches below, no scuff marks from climbing spikes. The massive Douglas fir's trunk was perfectly smooth for the first 20 feet, impossible to climb without equipment. Yet there hung Megan Campbell's size 8.5 Merrill, still warm to the touch when I finally managed to retrieve it using my extendable baton. That's when I noticed the smell. It started as just a faint wrongness in the air, something underneath the normal forest scents of cedar and moss. Something dry and old like the back room of a museum. But as I continued following Megan's trail deeper into the rainforest, the smell grew stronger, more specific, bone dust. The trail markers became increasingly strange. 20 yards past the boot tree, I found her water bottle hanging from a branch at eye level, still half full. 50 yards beyond that, her trail mix scattered in a perfect circle around the base of a massive cedar stump, as if something had taken time to arrange each nut and raisin individually. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, photographing each impossible scene. My smartphone showed 2 bars of signal, but when I tried calling dispatch directly, every call dropped after 2 rings. By 1:15 p.m., I was 3 miles off the maintained trail, following a path that shouldn't exist. The forest here felt primordial, untouched by human presence except for Megan's increasingly bizarre trail markers. Her fleece jacket hung from a devil's club bush like a scarecrow. Her hiking poles stood upright in the soft earth, planted there with military precision. Each discovery made my stomach clench tighter with dread. This wasn't random. Someone, or something, was deliberately placing these items, leading me deeper into the woods with breadcrumbs of evidence that defied explanation. The bone smell was overwhelming now, mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of the incense my grandmother burned at church, but wrong. Corrupted. I checked my supplies. Half a bottle of water left, energy bar and beef jerky, emergency blanket, first aid kit, flashlight with 6 hours of battery, and my radio with increasingly poor reception. The October afternoon was already growing dim under the thick canopy, and my GPS showed I was now 4.2 miles from the nearest marked trail. Unit 23 to dispatch, I tried again. I'm following evidence trail into sector, I checked my coordinates. Sector 9 Charlie Echo, requesting backup at my position. Nothing but static. That's when I heard the drums. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Cole Anderson's situation? Comment below. The sound drifted through the trees like something from a nature documentary about indigenous peoples, but wrong. The rhythm was too complex, too purposeful. And underneath the drumbeat, I could swear I heard chanting in a language that made my teeth ache. I followed the sound, my rookie training warring with every survival instinct screaming at me to turn back. But Megan Campbell was out here somewhere, and her mother's broken voice on the phone that morning, "Please find my baby, she's all I have left," drove me forward through the gathering gloom. The drumming led me to a clearing I would swear wasn't on any Park Service map. Ancient cedars formed a perfect circle around a space the size of a basketball court, their canopy so thick overhead that it felt like twilight even though my watch showed 2:30 p.m. In the center of the clearing stood something that made my blood freeze. It was a lodge of some kind, but built entirely from bones. Human bones. Femurs formed the frame, rib cages created domed sections, and hundreds of skulls filled in the gaps like grotesque mortar. The structure stood 12 feet tall and twice as wide, emanating that awful museum smell mixed with burning sage and something fouler. The drumming stopped. "Megan?" I called out, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "Megan Campbell, if you can hear me, call out." Silence. Then from inside the bone lodge, a voice answered. "She cannot answer, young ranger. She gives her voice to the ceremony now." A figure emerged from the lodge's entrance, a doorway formed by two massive elk skulls. At first glance, it looked like an elderly Native American man in traditional dress. But as it stepped into the dim clearing light, I saw the wrongness. Its skin was the color and texture of old leather, stretched too tight over bones that seemed too long for its frame. What I had taken for traditional beadwork was actually small human teeth, sewn into patterns across its buckskin shirt. And its eyes. Its eyes were empty sockets, filled with a dim red glow like dying embers. "My name is He Who Gathers Bones," the thing said, its voice like wind through dry leaves. "I have been the keeper of this sacred place for 300 winters. Your Megan Campbell will join my collection, as will you, young one." I fumbled for my radio, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "Unit 23 to dispatch, I have a..." My voice failed me. What did I have? A situation? A suspect? A goddamn nightmare come to life? "Your talking device will not function here," He Who Gathers Bones said conversationally, stepping closer. "This place exists between the spaces your people understand. I brought your Megan here as you brought yourself, following the trail I prepared." "Where is she?" I managed to ask, backing toward the tree line. "Is she alive?" "Alive, yes, but changed, as you will be changed." The creature gestured toward the bone lodge, and I caught a glimpse of movement inside. Humanoid shapes, but wrong. Too thin, too tall, moving with jerky marionette motions. "The spirits of this land spoke to me long ago," the creature continued, following my retreat step for step. "They showed me how to preserve the essence of those who walk my forest. Your bones will join my lodge. Your spirit will join my servants." Something crashed through the underbrush behind me, one of those impossible tall figures from inside the lodge. It had once been human, I could tell, but the bones had been rearranged, lengthened somehow. Extra ribs jutted from its torso like armor plating. Its skull had been stretched vertical, giving it the appearance of some hellish giraffe. When it opened its mouth, dozens of human teeth rattled inside like dice in a cup. I ran, crashing through ferns and Devil's Club, leaping fallen logs. My ranger training kicked in even as my rational mind gibbered in terror. Stay on game trails when possible. Use landmarks to maintain direction. Conserve energy for long-term flight. But this forest wasn't following normal rules anymore. Paths that should have led back toward the main trail instead curved in impossible directions. The sun, what little I could see through the canopy, seemed to be moving backward across the sky. And always I could hear them behind me, the shuffling, clicking, rattling sounds of reanimated bones pursuing through the undergrowth. My water ran out at what my watch claimed was 4:45 p.m., but the light filtering through the trees suggested it was well past sunset. My radio produced nothing but static and an occasional whisper in that tooth-aching language. The battery indicator on my GPS unit flickered between full and empty like a broken bulb. I found myself in another clearing, this one filled with bone totems, structures like demented scarecrows made from human remains. And there, tied to the largest totem in the center, was Megan Campbell, She was alive, but barely conscious. Her hiking clothes had been replaced with some kind of buckskin dress decorated with small bones and teeth. Her brown hair hung lank around a face painted with symbols and what looked horribly like dried blood. "Megan," I whispered, creeping toward her through the forest of bone totems. "I'm Ranger Anderson. I'm here to get you out." Her eyes focused on me with difficulty. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "He's been calling to you, using me as bait. This is his hunting ground now." "Can you walk?" I asked, working at the leather bonds holding her to the totem pole. "My bones," she whimpered. "He's been changing my bones from the inside. I can feel them growing." I looked at her with my flashlight and nearly vomited. Her forearms were visibly longer than they should be, the bones stretching her skin tight. Her rib cage seemed to have added extra sections, making her torso unnaturally elongated. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "He who gathers bones does not fear your Christ," came that wind-dry voice from the edge of the clearing. "Your God has no power in the spaces between spaces." The creature stepped into view, but it wasn't alone anymore. A dozen of its reanimated servants shambled behind it, human skeletons reconstructed into impossible configurations. Some had arm bones replacing leg bones, making them scuttle like spiders. Others had been built tall and thin like twisted trees. One appeared to be made from the bones of multiple people, a writhing mass of rib cages and finger bones that moved like a many-armed octopus. "You have led yourself into my web so perfectly, young ranger," he who gathers bones said. "Your eagerness to prove yourself, your pride in your knowledge of these woods. I felt your emotions from miles away. Pride and fear, the perfect bait." I drew my emergency knife, 6 inches of steel that seemed laughably inadequate against a dozen bone monsters and their demonic master. "Let her go. Take me instead." The creature laughed, a sound like branches scraping against a window. "I will take both. She will birth my new servants while you patrol my territory for eternity, hunting fresh bones for my collection." That's when I remembered my grandmother's words from 30 years ago, sitting in that little Baptist church in Tennessee. "Evil can't stand in the presence of real love, baby. Love burns it like holy fire." I thought about Megan's mother, crying over the phone that morning. I thought about my own parents, proud as hell when I got this ranger job. I thought about every missing person case I'd studied in training, every family destroyed by unanswered questions. And I got angry. "You want bones?" I shouted, charging toward the creature with my pathetic knife raised high. "Come take mine." He who gathers bones raised one elongated hand, and invisible force slammed into me like a freight train. I flew backward into a bone totem, ribs screaming as they absorbed the impact. The knife went spinning away into the darkness. "Your courage is admirable but useless," the creature said, approaching my crumpled form. "Now you will—" The shot rang out like thunder. Martinez stepped into the clearing, his .40 caliber service weapon smoking in his hands. The blessed iron bullet had taken off half of He Who Gathers Bones' skull, revealing the hollow interior filled with writhing shadows instead of brain matter. "Rule number 1, rookie," Martinez said, chambering another round. "Always let someone know you're 20 when you go off trail. I've been tracking your radio pings for 3 hours." The creature screamed, a sound like wind through a graveyard, and its skeletal servants began advancing on us from all sides. "The bullets won't kill it," I gasped, struggling to my feet. "It's not really alive." "Maybe not," Martinez said, putting 2 more rounds center mass into the creature's chest. "But iron still hurts the bastard. Get the girl!" I stumbled toward Megan as Martinez kept up a steady rate of fire, his shots disrupting the advancing skeletons, but not destroying them. Bone fragments exploded like shrapnel with each hit, only to begin crawling back together moments later. "We can't fight them all," I said, sawing through Megan's bonds with a sharp piece of rib bone. She was barely conscious, her unnaturally elongated bones making her difficult to carry. "We don't fight," Martinez said, dropping his empty magazine and slapping in a fresh one. "We run. These woods connect to the main trail system about half a mile east. Can you carry her?" I got Megan over my shoulder in a fireman's carry, her impossible anatomy making the position awkward and painful. Let's go. We ran through the forest of bone totems as he who gathers bones howled behind us, his servants clicking and rattling in pursuit. Martinez's flashlight beam danced wildly ahead of us, revealing glimpses of normal forest mixed with nightmare territory. "This way," Martinez shouted, pointing toward what looked like a solid wall of undergrowth. "Trust me." I followed him through what turned out to be an illusion. The wall of brush parted like curtains, revealing a familiar maintenance trail. My GPS unit immediately flickered back to life, showing our position as less than a mile from the parking area. "How did you—" I started to ask. 30 years in these woods," Martinez panted. "You learn where the thin places are, places where things that shouldn't exist can bleed through." Behind us, the sounds of pursuit faded, as if we'd crossed some invisible barrier. The bone creatures' rattling grew distant, then silent. Even the smell of ancient death dissipated, replaced by the clean scent of cedar and rain. We reached the trailhead parking lot at 11:47 p.m. according to my watch, though that seemed impossible, given that we'd entered the forest that morning. Martinez's Ranger truck waited under the LED lights like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Radio dispatch," Martinez ordered as he helped me load Megan into the back seat. "Tell them we need a medical evac to Harborview. Possible bone fractures and other complications." Megan drifted in and out of consciousness during the 40-minute drive to meet the helicopter. In her lucid moments, she whispered fragments of what she remembered, being led deeper into the forest by the sound of crying children, finding the bone lodge, being slowly transformed by some kind of ritual that changed her from the inside out. "The children," she whispered as the helicopter lifted off. "They're still down there. The ones he took before. Still crying in the dark." Martinez and I watched the helicopter disappear into the night sky, its red lights blinking against the stars. "There are going to be questions," he said finally. "Official reports. Investigations. What do we tell them?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring back toward the forest. "We tell them Miss Campbell got lost, fell down a ravine, and suffered some unusual fractures. End of story. What about the children she mentioned? The other victims?" "Kid," Martinez said, putting a fatherly hand on my shoulder, "there are some things in these woods that have been here since before the first white man set foot in Washington. Things that know how to hide, how to wait, how to hunt. We saved one person tonight. That's a victory." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist we go back with backup and proper equipment, but I could still taste that bone dust in the air, still hear the echo of inhuman laughter in my memory. Some battles, I was learning, aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be survived. 6 months later, I transferred to Mount Rainier National Park. Megan Campbell recovered fully, though she never spoke publicly about what happened during her missing 18 hours. Her bones had somehow returned to normal proportions, as if the forest's influence couldn't maintain its hold once she was removed from its territory. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind blows through the trees just right, I swear I can still hear them, the crying of lost children echoing through ancient woods where things that shouldn't exist wait patiently for their next opportunity to hunt. My name is Cole Anderson, and I learned that some forests don't want to be protected. They want to be fed. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to those missing children. I read every single one. My name is Connor O'Brien, and Lucas Reed was investigating legends about the Seta de Chama Eterna when he disappeared, like the legends themselves had claimed him for their ancient hunger. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. on October 13th, 2018, while I was checking my gear in the ranger station at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My coffee had just reached that perfect temperature when my radio crackled to life with coordinates that would haunt my sleep for months to come. Unit 23, we have a missing hiker. Last known position, grid reference 35.6284 again, 83.43.12 W, Cataract Falls Trail Junction. The voice belonged to Sarah Chen, our dispatch coordinator, but there was something in her tone that made my hand pause halfway to my mouth with that first sip. I set down my coffee and reached for my phone, scrolling through the family photos while the details came through. Emma, my 8-year-old, grinning with her missing front tooth from our camping trip last month. My wife Kelly, laughing at something I'd said while making pancakes yesterday morning. Little Michael, only 4, asleep in his Superman pajamas after I'd read him 3 bedtime stories. These faces stared back at me from my phone screen as Sarah's voice continued with the details that would pull me away from them once again. Missing person is Lucas Reed, 26-year-old male from Nashville. Last seen by fellow campers around 11 p.m. last night near the old fire tower ruins. Subject was reportedly researching local historical legends for some kind of academic paper. Sarah's voice carried a slight tremor that she was trying to hide, but I'd worked with her for 7 years, and I knew when something was eating at her beyond standard protocol. I grabbed my pack, checking the familiar weight of my gear. GPS unit fully charged, emergency beacon, first aid kit, water purification tablets, rope, headlamp with extra batteries. The routine was comforting. Muscle memory built over 12 years as a ranger in these mountains. But as I shouldered the pack, my phone buzzed with a text from Kelly. "Drive safe, honey. Emma wants to show you her science project when you get home. We love you." The message made my chest tight with that familiar pull between duty and family, between other people's emergencies and my own children's bedtime stories. The drive to the trailhead took 43 minutes through morning fog that clung to the mountain roads like smoke. My radio chattered with updates from other units, but one detail kept echoing in my mind. Lucas had been researching local legends. In these mountains, that usually meant one of 3 things: Cherokee folklore, Civil War ghost stories, or the darker tales that local families whispered about, but rarely spoke aloud to outsiders. I parked at the Cataract Falls trailhead and immediately noticed Lucas's Honda Civic, license plate visible in my peripheral vision as I approached. The car sat alone in the gravel lot, morning dew beating on its windshield like tears. Inside, I could see a laptop bag, energy bar wrappers, and what looked like printed pages scattered across the passenger seat. The sight of those papers made something cold settle in my stomach, though I couldn't articulate why. The trail to the fire tower ruins was a moderate 3.2-mile hike through mixed hardwood forest, but I'd walked it hundreds of times in my career. What I'd never experienced before was the absolute silence that greeted me as I started up the path. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, not even the buzz of insects that should have been abundant in the October morning. The silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight, broken only by the crunch of my boots on fallen leaves and the steady rhythm of my breathing. By mile marker 1.8, I found the first sign of Lucas's passage. A granola bar wrapper caught on a mountain laurel bush, standard trail debris except for the way it was positioned, not blown by wind or carelessly dropped, but placed deliberately, almost ceremonially, on a branch at exact eye level. The sight of it made my skin prickle with unease, though I filed it away as coincidence and continued climbing. The fire tower ruins came into view through the trees, like broken teeth against the gray morning sky. Built in the 1930s and abandoned since the 1970s, the concrete foundation and rusted steel framework had become a popular destination for hikers seeking Instagram-worthy photos. But as I approached the clearing, I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The smell of wood smoke, faint but unmistakable, drifting through air that held no visible signs of fire. Lucas's campsite was set up in a small clearing about 50 yards from the tower ruins, and walking into it felt like stepping into a stage set, arranged by someone with disturbing attention to detail. His tent stood perfectly erected, guy lines taut, rainfly properly secured. His camp stove sat clean and cold on a flat rock with a pot of what looked like instant oatmeal still sitting beside it, spoon laying across the rim as if he'd been interrupted mid-bite. But Lucas himself was nowhere to be seen. I keyed my radio. Unit 23 to dispatch. I'm at the missing hiker's campsite. Scene appears undisturbed, no signs of struggle or hasty departure. Beginning preliminary search pattern. Sarah's response came back with that same underlying tension. Copy, Unit 23. How's the feeling up there? The question stopped me cold. Come again, dispatch. Nothing, Connor. Maintain regular check-ins. Let us know what you find. I spent the next hour conducting a systematic grid search around the campsite, following standard protocol for missing hiker situations. Lucas's trail was easy to follow at first, size 10. 5 hiking boots with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel, heading northwest from his camp toward the deeper wilderness areas where cell service disappeared and GPS coordinates became suggestions rather than certainties. But after about half a mile, something began to feel fundamentally wrong with the tracks I was following. The boot prints started showing signs of hesitation, shorter steps, occasional direction changes, places where he'd stopped and apparently stood still for extended periods. But stranger than that was the way the forest seemed to respond to his passage. Branches hung at wrong angles as if they'd been deliberately moved aside and forgotten to spring back. Rocks that should have been stable showed scrape marks from his boots, but the displaced soil around them had settled in patterns that suggested far more time than the 12 hours since his disappearance. My phone showed the last text message I'd sent to Kelly. At the search site, should be home by dinner. The timestamp read 9:23 a.m. My watch now showed 2:47 p.m., but I had no memory of the intervening 5 hours. The realization hit me like ice water in my veins. I'd lost time somehow somewhere in these woods following Lucas's trail deeper into terrain I thought I knew like my own backyard. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Connor's situation? Comment below. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail back looked different now, as if the forest had rearranged itself while I wasn't paying attention. Trees seemed closer together. Shadows fell at angles that defied the sun's position, and that persistent smell of wood smoke had grown stronger, carrying with it an undertone of something else. Something that reminded me of childhood nightmares about things burning that shouldn't burn. That's when I found Lucas's research papers. They were scattered around the base of an ancient oak tree, pages weighted down with small stones in a pattern that looked almost ritualistic. The papers were printouts from various websites, academic journals, and what appeared to be scanned historical documents. As I gathered them, reading became an exercise in mounting dread that started in my stomach and crawled up my spine like cold fingers. The documents told the story of the Sedada Chama Eterna, the Eternal Flame Cult, a group that had supposedly operated in these mountains from the 1890s through the 1940s. According to Lucas's research, they worshipped something they called O Fogo Vivo, the living fire, an entity that existed somewhere between the physical and spiritual worlds. The cult believed that through ritual sacrifice by burning, they could feed this entity and gain control over supernatural flame that burned hotter and hungrier than any earthly fire. One document, a photocopy from what looked like a 1943 newspaper, described the disappearance of 7 people over a 2-month period. The headline read, "Mountain cultists sought in disappearances." Below it, in smaller text, local residents report strange fires that burn without fuel, leaving no ash, consuming victims completely. The article went on to describe how authorities had found evidence of ritual sites throughout the national forest, but never any bodies, never any ashes, only burn marks in impossible patterns that seemed to move and shift when no one was watching. But it was Lucas's handwritten notes in the margins that made my hands shake as I read them. He'd written, "Interviewed Margaret Holtzclaw, 89, last surviving family member of original witnesses. She says the cult never died out. They just went deeper underground. Claims her grandfather saw them perform rituals in hidden clearings and that the living fire still calls to people who get too curious about the old stories." At the bottom of the last page, in Lucas's increasingly erratic handwriting, found the ritual site. Grid coordinates 35.6195 degree N, 83.441 degree W. The stones are still warm. Something is still here. Something is still watching. If anyone finds these notes, don't follow my trail. The fire wants new fuel. I checked my GPS. Those coordinates were less than half a mile from my current position, deeper into the section of forest where even experienced rangers rarely ventured. My radio crackled with static when I tried to call in the discovery, and my cell phone showed no signal despite being in an area where I'd had coverage that morning. But what made my decision for me was the sound that drifted through the trees from the direction of Lucas's coordinates. A sound like wood crackling in a campfire, but with an underlying rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. The trail to the coordinates took me through terrain that shouldn't have existed. I'd hiked these mountains for over a decade, had topographical maps memorized, knew every ridge and valley within a 50-mile radius. But the path I followed seemed to descend into a hollow that wasn't on any map, where the canopy overhead grew so thick that afternoon light filtered down in dim greenish shafts that made everything look underwater. The ritual site, when I finally found it, was a circular clearing about 30 feet across, surrounded by standing stones that definitely hadn't been there the last time I'd been in this area. The stones were blackened granite, each about 8 feet tall, arranged in a perfect circle around a depression in the earth that looked like it had been excavated by hand. But what captured my attention immediately was the fact that the stones were warm to the touch, radiating heat like they'd been sitting in direct sunlight for hours, despite being shadowed by the surrounding trees. In the center of the circle, the excavated depression was filled with what looked like ash, but ash that moved and swirled despite the complete absence of wind. As I watched, patterns formed and dissolved in the gray powder, spirals, symbols, shapes that hurt to look at directly and seemed to burn themselves into my retinas. The smell of wood smoke was overwhelming here, mixed with something else that made my throat close up and my eyes water. That's when I saw Lucas. He was sitting cross-legged at the far edge of the clearing, back against one of the standing stones, completely motionless. For a moment, relief flooded through me. I'd found him. He was alive. The search was over. I could call it in, get him medical attention if needed, and be home in time for dinner with Kelly and the kids. But as I moved closer, details began to register that transformed relief into something much darker. Lucas's eyes were open, but they reflected no light. His skin had a waxy, translucent quality, and his clothes were unmarked by the kind of wear and damage you'd expect from someone who'd spent nearly 24 hours lost in the wilderness. But most disturbing was the fact that he showed no recognition of my presence, no reaction to my voice when I called his name, no response when I reached out to check his pulse. His pulse was there, but wrong. Too slow, too steady, like his heart was beating to a rhythm that had nothing to do with human physiology. And his skin was warm, warmer than it should have been, radiating the same unnatural heat as the standing stones. When I looked into his eyes, I saw tiny flames dancing in his pupils, flames that flickered and moved independently of any light source. "Lucas?" I whispered, knowing somehow that speaking louder would be a terrible mistake. "Lucas, can you hear me?" His head turned toward me with mechanical precision, neck moving in small, jerky increments like a marionette controlled by inexperienced hands. When his gaze met mine, I felt something reach into my mind with fingers made of heat and smoke, searching through my memories, examining my thoughts like someone reading a book. The invasion was intimate and violating, and it left behind images that weren't my own. Visions of fires that burned without fuel, of people walking willingly into flames that consumed them body and soul, of something vast and hungry and older than human civilization that fed on suffering and death. But stronger than the fear was the sudden, overwhelming pull of those flames dancing in Lucas's eyes. They promised warmth in a world that had always been too cold, offered purpose to a life that felt increasingly meaningless, whispered about the transcendence that waited beyond the barrier of flesh and bone. I found myself taking a step forward, then another, drawn by a compulsion that felt like gravity, like falling towards something that wanted to catch me and hold me and make me part of itself forever. The only thing that broke the spell was my phone buzzing against my chest with an incoming text message. The notification sound was like a gunshot in the supernatural silence, and for a moment the flames in Lucas's eyes flickered and dimmed. I fumbled for the phone with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice before managing to read the message. It was from Emma. "Daddy, when are you coming home? Mommy says you're helping someone, but I miss you and I want to show you my science project about volcanoes. I made it special for you because you work in the mountains. Love you infinity +1. The words hit me like cold water, washing away the supernatural compulsion and replacing it with the desperate need to get home to my family. I looked up to find Lucas still staring at me, but now the flames in his eyes seemed angry, frustrated, like a predator that had been cheated of easy prey. He opened his mouth to speak, but what came out wasn't his voice. It was the sound of fire consuming dry wood, of superheated air rushing through a chimney, of something vast and inhuman trying to squeeze itself through human vocal cords. "Stay," the thing wearing Lucas's face said in a voice like crackling flames. "Join the eternal burning. Feed the fire that never dies. Your family will understand when they see what you've become." I backed away from the circle, phone clutched in my hand like a talisman, Emma's words echoing in my mind like a prayer. The standing stones seemed to pulse with heat as I moved, and I could feel the attention of something immense and hungry focusing on me with the intensity of a searchlight. The ash in the center of the circle began to swirl faster, forming shapes that looked like reaching hands, grasping fingers, faces twisted in ecstasy and agony. "Connor." Lucas's voice again, but clearer now, more human. I stopped, hope fluttering in my chest despite everything I'd witnessed. "Connor, please. It hurts. It burns but doesn't consume. Help me." For a moment, Lucas looked like himself again, confused, frightened, trapped. The flames in his eyes dimmed to barely visible flickers, and his expression was pure human terror. He was still in there somewhere, fighting against whatever had taken control of him. The realization that he might still be savable hit me like a physical blow, warring against every instinct that screamed at me to run. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, taking a careful step back toward the circle. "Break the stones," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "Break the circle, set us free." But even as he spoke, I could see the flames beginning to dance in his eyes again, growing brighter and more aggressive. Whatever was controlling him was fighting back, using his desperation as bait to draw me deeper into its trap. I thought about Emma's text message, about Kelly probably starting dinner preparations, about little Michael waiting for his bedtime story. My family needed me to come home. They needed me to be smart, to be careful, to not become another victim of whatever ancient hunger had claimed Lucas. "I'm going to get help," I told him, backing away again. "I'm going to bring a team, equipment, people who know how to handle this kind of situation." "There is no help," Lucas said, and now his voice carried harmonics that sounded like multiple people speaking in unison. "There is only the fire. There is only the feeding. There is only the eternal burning that cleanses all pain and fear and doubt." I turned and ran. The forest fought me every step of the way back to the trailhead. Branches caught at my clothes and equipment, roots seemed to shift and move to trip me, and the path itself appeared to change and twist, leading me in circles that should have been impossible in terrain I knew so well. My GPS showed coordinates that made no sense, placing me in locations that didn't exist on any map. My radio produced nothing but static that occasionally resolved into what sounded like voices speaking in a language that predated human speech. But Emma's text message kept me focused, kept me moving. Every time I stopped to catch my breath or check my bearings, I read her words again. "Love you, infinity plus one." It became a mantra, an anchor point in a reality that seemed increasingly fluid and unreliable. My daughter was real. My wife was real. My son was real. They were waiting for me to come home, and that was more powerful than any supernatural compulsion. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded me too much of the flames I'd seen dancing in Lucas's eyes. I tried my radio one more time and was shocked when Sarah's voice came through clearly. "Unit 23, this is dispatch. Connor, where the hell have you been? We lost contact with you 8 hours ago." 8 hours. I checked my watch and felt reality tilt sideways again. It was 6:43 p.m. I'd entered the forest at 9:30 a.m. and found Lucas's campsite within an hour. By my subjective experience, I'd spent maybe 3 hours in the woods total. But somehow, an entire day had passed while I was following trails that led to places that shouldn't exist. "Dispatch, I found Lucas Reed," I said into the radio, my voice hoarse from running and fear. "But we're going to need a specialized extraction team. This isn't a standard rescue situation." Copy that, Unit 23. Medical team is standing by. What's his condition? How do you explain over radio that someone is alive but not alive, possessed by something that feeds on human suffering, trapped in a ritual circle that exists in a pocket of reality where normal physics don't apply? How do you request an extraction team for someone who's been claimed by an entity that's been hungry for decades? He's compromised, I said finally. We need people who specialize in unusual situations, and Sarah, I need you to contact my wife, tell her I'm safe, and I'll be home as soon as possible. The drive back to the ranger station took 43 minutes, the same amount of time it had taken that morning, but it felt like crossing between two different worlds. Every few miles I pulled over to send text messages to Kelly. Safe, coming home soon. Love you all more than words. The replies came back immediately, grounding me in the reality of family dinners and homework help and bedtime stories. At the station, I wrote my incident report with shaking hands, trying to find official language for experiences that existed outside the boundaries of official reality. I requested a specialized extraction team, knowing that whoever responded would need to be prepared for something far outside standard search and rescue protocols, and I made photocopies of Lucas's research papers, studying them late into the night while my family slept, trying to understand exactly what we were dealing with. The rescue attempt 3 days later involved a team of 12 people, including Park Service personnel, local law enforcement, and 2 individuals whose credentials I wasn't allowed to examine, but who carried equipment I'd never seen before. They found the ritual site exactly where my GPS coordinates indicated, but Lucas was gone. The standing stones remained, still warm to the touch, still radiating that unnatural heat. The ash in the center of the circle had formed new patterns, symbols that hurt to look at directly, and seemed to move when observed peripherally. But they found something else, something that made the specialized team members exchange glances and begin packing their equipment with increased urgency. Burned into the earth at the base of each standing stone were human handprints, dozens of them, as if people had pressed their palms against the ground while being consumed by supernatural fire. The prints were of different sizes, clearly from different individuals, and they glowed with a faint red light that was only visible through the specialized equipment the team had brought. Lucas Reed was officially listed as missing, presumed dead. His car was retrieved from the trailhead. His research papers were classified as evidence in an ongoing investigation, and the ritual site was designated as a restricted area with permanent monitoring equipment installed. But none of that changed the fact that somewhere in those mountains, something ancient and hungry was still feeding, still growing stronger, still calling to people who got too curious about old legends. I transferred to a different Park Service district 6 months later, moving my family to Colorado where the mountains were younger and the forests held different kinds of shadows. But I still wake up some nights with the taste of wood smoke in my mouth and the memory of flames dancing in human eyes. I still carry Emma's text message in my phone, reading it whenever the world feels too dark or too strange. Love you infinity +1, because in the end, that's what saved me. Not my training, not my equipment, not my knowledge of wilderness survival. What saved me was the love of an 8-year-old girl who wanted to show her daddy a science project about volcanoes, who missed me while I was gone, who loved me infinity +1. In a world where ancient hungers still prowl the deep places and supernatural fires burn without fuel, family love remains the strongest magic of all. Lucas Reed is still out there somewhere, in those mountains where reality grows thin and old things wait patiently for new victims. The Seta da Chama Eterna continues its eternal burning, feeding on human suffering, growing stronger with each soul it claims. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blows from the southeast, I can still smell wood smoke carried on the air, still hear the distant sound of something vast and hungry calling my name. But I have a family to protect, children to raise, a life to live. And as long as Emma needs help with her homework, as long as Michael wants bedtime stories, as long as Kelly waits for me to come home safe at the end of each day, I have something more powerful than any supernatural entity. I have love that burns brighter than any eternal flame, love that's stronger than any ancient hunger, love that will always guide me home. My name is Connor O'Brien, and this is the story of how family love saved my soul from an eternal burning that consumes everything except the bonds that tie us to the people who matter most. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Lucas Reed. I read every single one. My name is Luke Patterson, and when 3 people swore they had seen Hannah Rodriguez in different locations at the same exact hour, I knew we were facing something beyond human comprehension. It was October 28th, 2018, 3:47 p.m., and I was standing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park Ranger Station, staring at 3 separate incident reports that made my Cherokee grandfather's warnings about the Nunahai, the spirit people, echo in my mind like thunder. Ranger Patterson. The trembling voice belonged to Mrs. Rodriguez, Hannah's mother, whose red-rimmed eyes held the kind of desperation that could shatter mountains. Please tell me you believe us. Please tell me you'll find my baby girl. I looked down at the reports again, my calloused fingers tracing the impossible timeline. 2:15 p.m. Kevin Marshall saw Hannah at Cataract Falls, waving from across the gorge, wearing her distinctive red Columbia jacket. 2:15 p.m. Sarah Chen photographed Hannah at Chimney Top Summit 3 miles away. Same red jacket, definitely her face. 2:15 p.m. Tom Bradley heard Hannah calling for help from Midnight Hole, 5 miles in the opposite direction, red jacket visible through the trees. All 3 witnesses independently called 911 within minutes of each other. All 3 described the exact same person in the exact same clothing at the exact same time in 3 physically impossible locations. My radio crackled. Unit 23, what's your 20? Gatlinburg Station beginning search operations for missing person Hannah Rodriguez, I responded, checking my gear one final time. Garmin GPS, fresh batteries, emergency beacon, first aid kit, enough water for 48 hours. My grandfather's sacred tobacco pouch hung next to my badge, a reminder that some hunts require more than standard ranger protocols. Copy that, Luke. Weather's turning nasty up there. You've got maybe 6 hours of daylight. 6 hours to find a 19-year-old college student who'd apparently defied the laws of physics. 6 hours before the Halloween moon rose over mountains that my ancestors knew held doorways to other worlds. I kissed the photo of my wife Sarah and 8-year-old daughter Ayana that I kept in my wallet, whispered a Cherokee prayer to the 4 directions, and headed into the forest that had been my family's sacred ground for over 200 years. The first sign. The trail to Cataract Falls should have taken 45 minutes. I made it in 30, my boots pounding against the familiar earth as afternoon shadows grew longer and somehow wrong. The October air carried scents that didn't belong. Cigarette smoke from brands that hadn't existed for decades, pomade hair tonic, and underneath it all, the metallic tang of old coins. My radio squawked at 4:23 p.m. Luke, this is Kevin Marshall again. I need to tell you something else about what I saw. Go ahead, Kevin. When Hannah waved at me from across the gorge, her mouth was moving like she was talking to someone. But Luke, there was nobody else there. She was talking to empty air and... His voice broke, and she looked terrified. The trees around me seemed to press closer. In Cherokee tradition, my grandfather had taught me, fear in the forest means the spirits are watching, and when spirits watch, they're usually deciding whether you're prey or predator. I reached Cataract Falls at 4:31 p.m. The waterfall thundered over granite cliffs, and Kevin Marshall stood exactly where he'd reported, pointing across the 60-foot gorge. Right there, Ranger Patterson, she was standing right there. I pulled out my binoculars and studied the opposite ledge. No way to cross except by hiking 2 miles around. No signs of human passage, but something glinted in the dying sunlight, a small object wedged between 2 rocks. Kevin, I need you to hike back to the parking area and wait for backup. Understand? But what if, now? The authority in my voice came from 5 years as a ranger and 3 generations of Cherokee tradition. Some things civilian eyes weren't meant to see. After Kevin's footsteps faded, I began the treacherous climb down into the gorge. The rocks were slick with mist, and twice I nearly lost my footing on stones that seemed to shift under my boots like they were alive. My grandfather's voice whispered in my memory, "When the earth itself fights you, grandson, you're walking where the dead walk." 20 minutes later, I hauled myself up the opposite ledge, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. My hands were raw and bleeding, and my water supply was already down by a third. The glinting object sat exactly where I'd spotted it, Hannah's student ID card from University of Tennessee. But the card was bone dry despite being next to a waterfall for hours. And the photograph. Jesus Christ, the photograph was wrong. Hannah's face in the picture was moving, her mouth opening and closing silently, eyes tracking my movement like she was trying to speak. My hands started shaking. In 10 years of emergency response, I'd never encountered anything that made my Cherokee spiritual training feel more necessary and more insufficient at the same time. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I found evidence at Cataract Falls, Hannah Rodriguez's student ID. But we need to expand the search. Something's not right here." "Copy, Luke. How's your battery life?" I checked my phone. 67%. Radio, 3 bars. GPS, solid signal. Good for now. Weather Service is calling for a severe thunderstorm system moving in around 8 p.m. If you can't locate the subject by then, we'll have to suspend until morning. 4 hours. 4 hours to find a girl who might be trapped between worlds, being hunted by something that could manipulate reality itself. I started the brutal hike toward Chimney Top's summit, where Sarah Chen had photographed Hannah at the exact same impossible moment. The Gambler's Introduction. By 5:15 p.m. I was halfway up the Chimney Tops trail, and the wrongness in the air had intensified. The normal sounds of Smoky Mountain wildlife, black bears, wild boar, hundreds of bird species, had gone completely silent. Even the wind through the oak and maple leaves had stopped, like nature itself was holding its breath. My throat burned from rapid elevation gain, and my legs felt heavy as lead. The trail markers seemed farther apart than they should be, and twice I checked my GPS only to find I was somehow a quarter-mile off course despite following the established path. That's when I heard it. Piano music. Specifically, a 1940s jazz standard, "I'll Be Seeing You," drifting through the forest like smoke. The melody was perfect, professional, but wrong in every possible way. There were no pianos within 20 miles of this location. I followed the sound through a stand of ancient hemlocks, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. My grandfather had taught me that when the impossible becomes possible, preparation matters more than understanding. The music led me to a clearing that definitely hadn't existed on any park map I'd studied in 5 years of ranger work. In the center sat a mahogany poker table with green felt surface, surrounded by 4 chairs. A man in an immaculate 1940s double-breasted suit sat shuffling cards with impossible dexterity, his movements so fluid they seemed to bend physics. He looked up as I approached, and his smile was the kind that politicians practiced in mirrors. "Ranger Patterson, Luke, if I may, please sit down. We have so much to discuss about young Miss Rodriguez." His voice carried the smooth confidence of a radio announcer from the FDR era, but underneath lurked something that made my spiritual senses scream danger. This wasn't human. This wasn't even close. "Where is she?" I demanded, keeping 10 feet between us and calculating escape routes. "Oh, she's perfectly safe. Well, mostly safe. Her continued safety depends entirely on your performance in our little game." He gestured to the poker table. "Please sit. The rules are quite simple. I'm not playing any games. I'm here to find Hannah Rodriguez and bring her home." The thing wearing a man's face laughed, and the sound made dead leaves swirl in impossible spirals around the clearing. "My dear Ranger, you've been playing my game since the moment you entered these woods. Every step you've taken, every choice you've made, all part of the grand contest." He dealt 5 cards face down on the table. "I am what your Cherokee ancestors might have called a Kituwa, a spirit of chance and consequence. Your modern world knows me by different names. In 1943, I was called Lucky Marconi, the best poker player in Chicago, until I made a very poor wager with a very old power. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the poker table's surface. What kind of wager? My soul against unlimited luck at cards. I won every hand for 3 straight years, until the night I learned that unlimited luck means you can never lose, and never losing means you can never stop playing. His smile never wavered, but his eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow light. I've been playing ever since, Ranger Patterson, and now I need fresh opponents. Hannah Rodriguez is 19 years old. She doesn't deserve this. Deserve? He laughed again. She came looking for me, Luke. Spent 3 weeks researching local legends about a ghostly gambler in these mountains. She wanted to find the supernatural. Well, congratulations to Miss Rodriguez. She succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. I felt my grandfather's sacred tobacco pouch grow warm against my chest. Cherokee spiritual protection, passed down through 7 generations. Whatever this thing was, it was old and powerful, but it wasn't unopposed. Here are the rules, Lucky Marconi continued. We play 5 hands of poker. You win 3, I release the girl and disappear forever. I win 3, and Miss Rodriguez becomes my permanent playing partner in a game that never ends. And if I refuse? He snapped his fingers. Suddenly, Hannah's terrified voice echoed through the clearing. Help me. Please, someone help me. I can't get out. The cards keep changing, and I can't. The voice cut off abruptly. My heart rate spiked to combat levels. Every instinct screamed this was a trap, but Hannah Rodriguez was a real person with a real family who needed her home. Where is she? Between the cards, Ranger Patterson, trapped in the spaces between chance and certainty. Every hand we play determines whether she moves closer to freedom or deeper into my eternal game. I checked my gear one more time. Battery at 61%. Water supply holding steady. Emergency beacon ready if things went completely sideways. But looking at this supernatural predator, I realized my ranger training hadn't prepared me for this kind of rescue operation. One condition, I said, sitting down across from the thing that had once been Lucky Marconi. We play by Cherokee rules of honorable contest. No cheating, no supernatural interference with the cards themselves. His black hole eyes narrowed. You would invoke tribal law against me? My grandfather taught me that spirits must honor the terms they accept. Do you accept Cherokee contest rules, or are you afraid a human might outplay you fairly? For the first time, Lucky Marconi's perfect smile cracked. Very well, Ranger Patterson. But understand, Cherokee rules work both ways. If you lose, your soul joins the game as well. Forever. The stakes had just doubled. Hannah Rodriguez's life and my eternal soul against whatever passed for a supernatural gambler's honor. I picked up my 5 cards and looked at them in the dying October light. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Luke Patterson's situation? Comment below. The first hand, my cards, Jack of Hearts, Queen of Hearts, King of Hearts, Ace of Spades, 2 of Clubs. A decent start, 3 hearts in sequence but no immediate winning hand. Across the supernatural poker table, Lucky Marconi's fingers moved like spider legs as he arranged his cards. First hand determines opening stakes, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in smoke-filled backrooms. Tell me, Ranger Patterson, what do you value most? The question felt loaded with meaning beyond the words. In Cherokee tradition, questions from spirit beings always carried multiple layers of truth and consequence. My grandfather had taught me to answer with both honesty and strategic thinking. The safety of people under my protection. Excellent, then let's make this interesting. He placed a single card face down in the center of the table. I wager 1 hour of Hannah Rodriguez's safety. If you win this hand, she gains an hour of protection from harm. If I win, his smile stretched wider than anatomy should allow. She loses an hour of oxygen in her current location. The clearing temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My emergency training kicked in. Hypothermia was now a real concern, and my gear hadn't been selected for supernatural weather manipulation. But Hannah Rodriguez was suffocating somewhere between reality and nightmare, and every second I delayed was a second closer to her death. "Call," I said, placing my cards face up. Jack high straight potential, but no completed hand. Lucky Marconi flipped his cards with theatrical flair. 4 aces and a king of spades. 4 of a kind beats incomplete straights, Ranger Patterson. Miss Rodriguez now has approximately 5 hours of breathable air remaining in her current dimension. Hannah's voice echoed through the clearing again, weaker this time. "Please." Getting hard to breathe. The cards are everywhere and they're moving. My Cherokee spiritual training had taught me to read the deeper currents in supernatural encounters. This wasn't just about poker, it was about the collision between 2 different types of power. Lucky Marconi represented the worst of 1940s American materialism, greed, exploitation, and the belief that everything could be bought, sold, or wagered. But I carried something he couldn't understand. 3 generations of Cherokee wisdom about the connection between all living things. "Second hand," Lucky announced, dealing with mechanical precision. "Double or nothing. Winner takes 2 hours, loser forfeits 2 hours. My new cards: Ace of Hearts, Ace of Diamonds, King of Hearts, King of Diamonds, Queen of Spades, 2 pair. A solid hand, but not a guaranteed winner against a supernatural card player." "I'll raise the stakes," I said, feeling my grandfather's tobacco pouch grow warmer against my chest. "If I win this hand, you tell me Hannah's exact location. If you win, I'll answer one question about Cherokee spiritual protection truthfully." Lucky Marconi's black eyes glittered with interest. "You would trade sacred knowledge for a mere human girl?" "I would trade anything to save an innocent life." "Fascinating. Your people's spiritual traditions are antiquated, but they do carry certain protections that complicate my work." He studied his cards. "Call." I laid down my 2 pair. Lucky Marconi revealed 3 jacks. "Another victory for the house," he announced. "Now, Ranger Patterson, explain to me exactly how Cherokee tobacco offerings provide spiritual protection." The question hit me like a physical blow. Cherokee spiritual knowledge wasn't meant to be shared with hostile entities, but I'd given my word in a formal supernatural contest, and Cherokee honor demanded honesty even in the face of personal cost. "Tobacco is our most sacred plant," I said, feeling each word like a betrayal of my ancestors. "When properly blessed and carried with intent, it creates a spiritual boundary that most malevolent entities cannot cross. The offering connects the carrier to the protection of all Cherokee ancestors who've passed into the spirit world." Lucky Marconi nodded, filing the information away with predatory satisfaction. "Most illuminating. I do so enjoy learning about the various obstacles to my work." My hands were shaking now, and not from the supernatural cold. I'd just given away information that could potentially be used to harm other people with Cherokee spiritual protection. But Hannah Rodriguez was dying in some liminal space between dimensions, and my duty as both a ranger and a human being was to save her life. "Third hand," Lucky announced. "This one's for double stakes again. Winner takes 4 hours, loser forfeits 4 hours." But as he dealt the cards, something strange happened. The Jack of Hearts, the same card I'd held in the first hand, seemed to shimmer with impossible light for just a moment. And in that shimmering, I glimpsed Hannah's face, mouth moving in silent communication. She was trying to tell me something. My grandfather's voice whispered in my memory, "When spirits speak through sacred symbols, grandson, listen with more than your ears." I looked at my cards. Jack of Hearts, still shimmering faintly. 10 of Hearts, 9 of Hearts, 8 of Hearts, 7 of Hearts. A straight flush, one of the best possible hands in poker. But something in Lucky Marconi's perfect confidence told me he had something even better. "I'll raise again," I said, making a decision that could save or damn us both. "If I win this hand, Hannah goes free immediately. If you win..." I took a deep breath. "You get my soul and I take her place in your eternal game." Lucky Marcone's eyes went completely black. "Now you're thinking like a true gambler, Ranger Patterson." The cards trembled in my hands as I prepared to bet everything on a single hand of poker against a creature that had been cheating death for 75 years. The revelation. As I stared at my straight flush, the Jack of Hearts began to pulse with that strange light again. Suddenly, Hannah's voice came through not as an echo in the clearing, but directly into my mind. A Cherokee spiritual phenomenon my grandfather had called Dwivshti, the speaking of spirits. "Luke, can you hear me? I'm trapped inside the cards themselves. Every time he wins a hand, I sink deeper into the deck. But I can see his cards from inside here. He's cheating. The deck isn't normal. It's made from..." Her voice faded, but I'd heard enough. Lucky Marconi wasn't just a supernatural gambler, he was a supernatural cheater. The deck itself was part of his power, and Hannah was literally trapped within the cards, able to see his hand but unable to communicate, except through Cherokee spiritual channels. My grandfather's tobacco pouch was now radiating heat like a coal. The Cherokee spiritual protection wasn't just defending me, it was creating a connection with Hannah, who must have some indigenous heritage of her own to access the Dive HD. "Magnificent hand, Ranger Patterson," Lucky Marconi said, laying down his cards one by one. "But I'm afraid the house always wins." Royal flush. 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace of Spades. Impossible odds. In a normal deck, with the Jack of Hearts in my hand, there shouldn't be a Jack of Spades available for his royal flush. But I was playing against a creature that existed outside normal reality, using a deck made from supernatural materials. "You're cheating," I said quietly. "I prefer to think of it as playing with house rules." His smile was razor sharp. "And according to our agreement, your soul now belongs to..." I stood up abruptly, my hand moving to my grandfather's tobacco pouch. "Cherokee contest rules, which you accepted, includes spiritual oversight of all supernatural contests. I invoke the protection of my ancestors and challenge the validity of this game." The temperature plummeted another 20 degrees. Ice began forming on the poker table, and Lucky Marconi's perfect human disguise started to crack like old paint. "You cannot invoke ancestral intervention after losing, Ranger Patterson." "I can if the contest was conducted dishonorably." I opened the tobacco pouch and scattered the sacred leaves around the table in the 4 cardinal directions. "Spirits of my grandfathers, witness this deception and judge accordingly." The clearing filled with a presence that made the air itself feel alive. Lucky Marconi's human appearance began dissolving, revealing something underneath that was part shadow, part playing card, part mathematical equation given malevolent consciousness. "The human speaks truth," a voice said that seemed to come from the wind itself. "The contest was corrupted by deception. The compact is void," Lucky Marconi shrieked, a sound like 1,000 slot machines hitting jackpot simultaneously. The poker table began dissolving, cards flying everywhere in supernatural chaos. And from the center of the swirling mess, Hannah Rodriguez tumbled out of what looked like the space between 2 playing cards, gasping and solid and real. "Luke," she sobbed, grabbing onto my ranger jacket. I thought I was going to die in there. The cards kept changing and he kept winning and I couldn't breathe and... "You're safe now," I said, helping her to her feet and wrapping my emergency blanket around her shoulders. "We need to get you out of these mountains." But Lucky Marconi wasn't finished. "If I cannot have the girl," he snarled, his form now a writhing mass of shadow and playing cards, "then I'll take every soul in these mountains. No more games, Ranger Patterson. No more rules." The trees around the clearing began to wither and die. My radio crackled with emergency calls from across the park. Hikers collapsing, campers experiencing cardiac events. Every human being in a 20-mile radius suddenly in medical distress. Lucky Marconi was draining life force indiscriminately, turning the entire Great Smoky Mountains into his personal feeding ground. My grandfather's voice came to me clearly for the first time. "Some spirits cannot be reasoned with, grandson. Some spirits can only be banished." I looked at Hannah Rodriguez, 19 years old, studying anthropology at UT, probably unaware she had Cherokee ancestry that had saved her life tonight. Then I looked at my emergency supplies. Flares, emergency radio, first aid kit, and one more thing my grandfather had insisted I always carry. A traditional Cherokee cleansing sage bundle, blessed by the tribal elders and wrapped in red cloth. Hannah, I need you to get to the ranger station. Follow this trail downhill for 2 miles. Stay on the path no matter what you see or hear. Call for medical backup for everyone in the park. Can you do that? What about you? I'm going to finish what my grandfather should have done 75 years ago. The cleansing. As Hannah's footsteps faded down the trail, I faced the writhing supernatural mass that had once called itself Lucky Marconi. The creature's true form defied description. Imagine a tornado made of playing cards, poker chips, and human greed given physical substance, and you'd be close. My radio crackled with increasingly desperate emergency calls. Multiple cardiac events at Elkmont Campground, hikers collapsing on Appalachian Trail, medical evacuation needed for 40+ people. The entity was killing everyone in the park to fuel its rage over losing Hannah. Every second I delayed meant more innocent deaths. I unwrapped my grandfather's sage bundle and pulled out my emergency lighter. The sacred herbs caught fire immediately, producing thick white smoke that seemed to burn the air itself as it rose. By the power of the 4 directions, I began, speaking the Cherokee cleansing ritual my grandfather had taught me. By the wisdom of 7 generations, by the protection of all spirits who have gone before. Lucky Marconi's shriek nearly shattered my eardrums. The cards that made up his form began to smolder where the sage smoke touched them. You cannot banish me. I am bound to these mountains by blood and coin and 75 years of feeding. You are bound by greed and deception, I continued, walking clockwise around the creature while holding the burning sage. But Cherokee law recognizes no supernatural claim based on fraud. The sage smoke was having a visible effect. The playing cards that formed Lucky Marconi's body were catching fire and crumbling to ash. But the creature wasn't going quietly. A massive hand made of poker chips slammed down where I'd been standing a second before. I rolled behind an oak tree as another appendage of cards and mathematical symbols tried to crush me. My ranger training in wilderness survival was combining with Cherokee spiritual practice in ways my grandfather probably never envisioned. Even if you banish me, Lucky Marconi roared, the damage is done. 43 souls are already entering cardiac arrest. You can save the mountains or save the people, Ranger Patterson, but not both. My radio confirmed the horrible truth. Luke, we've got mass casualty event park-wide. Where the hell are you? The sage bundle in my hand was burning down fast. I had maybe 2 minutes of cleansing power left, but the banishment ritual required a full circle around the entity, about 5 minutes of continuous movement, while avoiding supernatural attacks that could kill me instantly. Unless Hannah Rodriguez had been trapped inside the cards themselves. She'd seen Lucky Marconi's perspective from within his power. If Cherokee spiritual protection could create Dweevshti communication with her, maybe it could work in reverse. I closed my eyes and reached out with the spiritual senses my grandfather had trained me to use. Hannah, if you can still hear me through Cherokee spiritual connection, I need you to tell me how to destroy this thing from the inside. Her voice came back faint but clear. The center card. In the middle of his chest area, there's an ace of spades that's older than the others. It's what anchors him to this dimension. But Luke, you'd have to get close enough to touch it. Close enough to touch a supernatural entity made of pure malevolence and mathematical impossibility. Close enough to die if I miscalculated by even an inch. I looked at my gear one more time. Flare gun, emergency beacon, rope, and a crazy idea that would either save 43 lives or get me killed in the most spectacular way possible. Lucky, I shouted, holding the sage bundle high. One last game. You and me, hand to hand. If I can touch your anchor card, you're banished forever. If you kill me first, you get to keep feeding on every soul in these mountains. The creature's laughter was like a slot machine having a seizure. You would bet your life on a single touch? Cherokee warrior tradition. Single combat to settle supernatural disputes. Accepted, Ranger Patterson. But when I tear you apart, I'm going to make Hannah Rodriguez watch from inside the cards. Lucky Marconi contracted into a roughly humanoid shape 12 feet tall, made entirely of swirling playing cards with the ancient ace of spades glowing in the center of his chest. The sage smoke had weakened him, but he was still impossibly fast and strong. I checked my watch, 7:43 p.m. Storm clouds were moving in fast, and my battery was down to 34%. If this didn't work, I'd die in the dark during a supernatural thunderstorm. But 43 people were counting on me, and Hannah Rodriguez was counting on me, and 3 generations of Cherokee spiritual training were counting on me. I gripped the burning sage bundle in my left hand and prepared to either save the Great Smoky Mountains or die trying. The final gamble. Lucky Marconi came at me like a hurricane made of mathematics and malice. His first swing, a massive fist of poker chips and playing cards, missed my head by inches as I dove and rolled across the clearing. The ground where I'd been standing was now a crater 3 feet deep. I came up running, sage smoke trailing behind me as I circled to his left side. The glowing ace of spades in his chest was at least 8 feet off the ground. I'd need a running leap and perfect timing to reach it. 41 souls now, Ranger Patterson, Lucky roared, swinging at me with an arm that stretched impossibly long. Soon they'll all be part of my eternal game. I feinted right, then dove left as another supernatural blow carved a furrow through solid granite. My radio was going insane with emergency calls. Multiple fatalities confirmed, need immediate medevac, losing people fast. The sage bundle was down to its last few inches. I had maybe 30 seconds of spiritual protection left before I was just a human being, trying to fight a supernatural entity with physical force. That's when Hannah Rodriguez's voice cut through the Cherokee spiritual connection one more time. Luke, he's getting power from each person who dies, but if you can banish him before they're fully dead, their souls snap back to their bodies. The medical emergencies weren't deaths yet. They were spiritual drainings that could be reversed if I banished Lucky Marconi fast enough. I stopped running and stood in the center of the clearing, holding the last burning inches of sage above my head. Cherokee spiritual law, I shouted. I invoke the right of Envi Udohiu, the sacred hunt. Lucky Marconi's attack halted mid-swing. Even supernatural entities were bound by certain cosmic laws, and the sacred hunt was one of the oldest. Explain, human. Single combat with traditional weapons only. You use only your original power, gambling and chance. I use only Cherokee spiritual protection and human courage. No supernatural strength, no reality manipulation, no card-based attacks. The creature's form contracted into the shape of the man he'd been in 1943. Well-dressed, ordinary-looking, holding only a deck of cards. But his eyes remained black holes that seemed to swallow light. If you win, I'm banished. If I win, you get my soul and everyone else's in these mountains. Accepted. Draw. He flipped a single card into the air between us. Queen of Hearts. Catch that card before it hits the ground using only human reflexes, and you win. Let it touch Earth and everyone dies. The card seemed to hang in the air for an impossibly long time, falling in slow motion about 6 feet away from me. But I could see Lucky Marconi's satisfied smile. He'd calculated the trajectory perfectly. The card would hit the ground just beyond my maximum jumping distance, unless I used more than human reflexes, unless I trusted Cherokee spiritual protection to enhance my physical abilities without violating the terms of the contest. My grandfather's voice whispered one last time, "Trust the spirits, grandson. Trust the connection to all living things." I took 3 running steps and leaped with every ounce of strength and faith I possessed. Time dilated. The Queen of Hearts fell through space like a feather. My fingertips stretched toward it as gravity pulled me downward. Cherokee spiritual energy flowed through my muscles, not giving me supernatural strength, but connecting me to the strength of every ancestor who'd ever lived in these mountains. My fingertips brushed the card just as my knees hit the ground. Lucky Marconi's scream shattered every piece of glass in a 10-mile radius. The creature's form exploded into 1,000,000 playing cards that caught fire and dissolved into ash before touching the ground. The supernatural cold vanished instantly, replaced by normal October mountain air. And across the park, 41 people gasped back to life as their souls snapped back to their bodies like rubber bands. My radio crackled with confused but relieved voices. Whatever just happened, vitals are stabilizing park-wide. People are waking up, requesting explanation for mass recovery event. I looked down at the Queen of Hearts in my hand. Hannah Rodriguez's face smiled back at me from the card and then faded away as the supernatural deck finally returned to normal reality. The return. I found Hannah Rodriguez at the ranger station 2 hours later, wrapped in emergency blankets and giving her statement to park investigators. She looked up when I walked in, and her eyes held the kind of recognition that comes only from shared supernatural trauma. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "It's over. Lucky Marconi has been banished from these mountains permanently." "How did you know what to do?" I touched my grandfather's empty tobacco pouch. I'd used all the sacred leaves during the cleansing ritual. Cherokee spiritual tradition teaches that some hunts can only be completed by the hunter who was meant to complete them. I think my grandfather always knew this day would come. Hannah nodded slowly. I should probably mention, my great-grandmother was Cherokee. Eastern Band. I never knew much about it, but I think that's why I could communicate with you during the card game. That's why you survived inside Lucky Marconi's power. Cherokee spiritual protection runs in bloodlines, even when the knowledge doesn't. Park Service investigators spent 3 more hours debriefing us, though the official report would list the mass medical emergency as unexplained atmospheric phenomenon, possibly related to barometric pressure changes. Some truths weren't meant for federal paperwork. At 11:47 p.m., I finally made it home to my wife Sarah and daughter Ayana. They were both asleep, but I kissed them each on the forehead and whispered a Cherokee prayer of gratitude for another day with my family. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah Rodriguez. "Thank you for saving my life. I'm thinking about changing my major to Native American Studies. I want to learn more about my great-grandmother's people." I texted back, "Cherokee Nation offers genealogy research services, and if you ever want to learn traditional spiritual protection practices, call me. These mountains are safe now, but there are other forests, other spirits, other hunts that might need Cherokee wisdom." 3 months later, Hannah Rodriguez became my first unofficial student in Cherokee Ranger spiritual practices. She graduated with honors in Native American Studies, wrote her senior thesis on supernatural encounters in Appalachian oral tradition, and now works as a cultural liaison between the Park Service and Eastern Band Cherokee Nation. Sometimes, in the early morning mist over Cataract Falls, visitors report seeing a young Cherokee woman and a grizzled ranger standing together on the opposite ledge, watching over the mountains that have been sacred for thousands of years. But those are just stories. After all, rangers don't believe in ghosts. We just know that some hunts never really end. They just pass from one generation to the next, waiting for the moment when ordinary people must choose between human courage and inhuman evil. And when that moment comes, Cherokee spiritual wisdom and a ranger's oath to protect people are usually enough. Usually. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Hannah Rodriguez in those cards. I read every single one. What supernatural force would you face to save an innocent life? Share your story below.